So welcome everybody. The joys of technical innovations. We had a little difficulty, but we're back and happy to see you all here. It's a nice crowd, almost 50 people, 49. That's tremendous. So thank you for giving up your Saturday afternoon. We should be done in time for everybody to tune into the Derby if you've got your hats ready. But for right now, we're happy to have Terry Winch with us. We were just, first of all, two things. You're all muted, but you can unmute if you want to, but I think it's better to keep the mute button on in case there's ambient sound. We won't disturb this conversation while we're talking. And then along the bottom of your screen, you can see a chat function. So if questions occur to you during the course of our discussion that you want to have answered at the end, we'll reserve some time for that, and we can address your questions that way. But just by way of introduction, Terry Winch, as we were discussing in the pre-event chatter there, is from the Bronx Irish Catholic, born in the post-war period. Attended a local Catholic school, St. Thomas Aquinas, up in the West Farms district. Went to Iona and Fordham as a master's degree in English. From there, he's primarily a writer, a musician as well, but he's most known for his poetry. Two works received awards: the Columbia Book Award for The Great Indoors, and the American Book Award winner for Irish Musicians and American Friends. The book that we're going to be talking about today, Seeing Eye Dog, is his first foray into fiction. It's a young adult novel.
Seeing Eye Boy.
Seeing Eye Boy. I know. I keep, sorry. I have it. He spent most of his working life as a writer and editor. He was a publisher of the mass transit readings down in Washington, D.C., readings from the DuPont Circle of poets that gathered in that area, you know, in the years before the turn of the century now, 1980s, 1990s. And for many years, he worked at the Smithsonian. He was the head of publishing for the museum, and then for about 15, 20 years, worked for the National Museum of the American Indian and actually created their publishing department there, and put out a lot of books in support of the museum's mandate there and a lot of their exhibits. He, as a musician, he's the founder of Celtic Thunder. The band is best known for their When New York Was Irish song. So he's had a pretty varied career in the arts, but writing seems to have, and editing seems to have paid a lot of the bills, and the music part is a labor of love, as I assume is the poetry. But today we're going to talk about the Seeing Eye Boy, and I have to say it's a really a charming book. The protagonist is a 12-year-old boy by the name of Matt Coffey, and it's kind of a coming of age book. Matt's got a lot going on in his life. He's taking Irish music lessons. He's learning to play the fiddle. He's got a crush on a girl who's a recent immigrant to the neighborhood, but her brother doesn't like him, so he's got to negotiate that tension. He and his buds in the neighborhood are getting ready to rumble with the Fordham baddies, and these kids are not really fighters. So how do you?
Baldies. Yeah.
Baldies.
Right.
How do you deal with that? And his parents have got him a job helping out a blind man in the neighborhood, who Matt comes to find out is a veteran of the Troubles in 1920s Ireland. So this man awakens in him a love and an interest in his own history, his own ancestral history. So it's a very confusing and active time for him. So my first question to you, Terry, I guess would be why this book? I mean, why this format? Why this book? Why this story?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to everyone who's here today. It's good to see. I see some familiar faces. I actually started the book a long time ago, and I think when I became a father, I'd never really read children's literature before. I don't remember reading any even when I was a child. But when my son came along, of course, I got immersed in all of that stuff, and I started reading some young adult fiction along with him back when he was around the same age as the protagonist. And I woke up one morning from a dream in the dream, I remembered some incidents from my childhood. And I just wrote down a list of about 10 items on a piece of paper. And that essentially became the outline of the novel. And I started writing it, right away. I wrote it in longhand over about an 11-month period. And one of the things I wanted to do was write a really fast-paced, interesting story. But I also wanted to put people inside the Irish immigrant world of the mid-20th century, that urban Irish immigrant world that I grew up in and that really started disappearing pretty much, by the time I became an adolescent, as happened throughout Irish America. I mean, by 1960 or so, the Irish immigrant populations have dispersed to the suburbs, and those old neighborhoods, which were so prevalent in America from the start of the big waves of immigration after the famine, peaking in the 1920s, but continuing on, into the 50s, et cetera, that by 1960, that's all pretty much over. So my whole life has been sort of spent trying to reclaim that past in some ways and to remember it and honor it and all of that. And so I wanted to create a book where I would put the reader inside that world where, for me growing up, a lot of the adults were Irish immigrants, and a lot of my friends and the other kids on the block were first generation Irish Americans. So there was that interplay between the generations and almost between two different cultures. And that was something that, made a permanent lasting imprint on my soul and brain. And I wanted to give a sense of what it was like to live inside that world.
So did you, so who did you write it for? Did you write it for yourself? Did you write it just for posterity, for your kids?
I guess I mean, I think it's hard to say who you're writing something for when you're writing it. I mean, I think primarily I was writing it for my son because, he, like me in a way, has grown up immersed in Irish music, and he never knew his paternal grandparents. So I wanted to leave behind a kind of record of what that world was like. So I think I had him in mind. And in fact, the relationship between the father and son in the book is partly modeled on me and my father and partly modeled on Michael and me. So
I mean, I have to say it's to everyone who's with us today, it's billed as a young adult novel, but I read it and I really liked it. It's really a charming book, and it's fast paced, but it's not kid-like. I mean, there's some not serious, but there's some interesting issues in there, and you really do get a flavor for the neighborhood. It's very sort of insular that way.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I definitely wasn't trying to dumb anything down at all. I mean, I wanted the writing to be good, and I wanted the writing to appeal to adults as well. So I'm glad if that happened.
Yeah, I think you definitely achieved that. The other thing I see in the book, because it's divided into very short chapters, like little chunks. And I have two questions regarding that. First is, it's almost like they're stanzas in a poem. Is that the way you think? I mean, do you think when you're writing in short bites like that, in short pieces, or?
Not necessarily. I mean, I've published 2 books of stories as well, and I mean, in my first book of fiction short stories, I mean, one book is nonfiction stories, but in that book, I mean, there are 2 stories that are like 50 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't. But with this book, I felt it would number one accelerate the pacing of the book if it was written in short pieces. But also, I was working full time when I was writing it. So I wrote it in journal notebooks, and I mean I was writing it in airports and planes and everywhere, mostly on weekends. So it helped keeping the chapters short because
Yeah,
I
they
could
don't
write one
seem.
at one sitting.
Yeah, they don't come across as rushed or forced in any way either. They're pretty complete. And I think that's probably your economy of language or your use of, the poet in you that keeps things concise and meaty, the proper use of
Yeah,
language.
yeah.
Did you write them out of sequence? I wondered that too. Did you write scenes out of sequence and then stitch it together, or was it chronological?
No, I pretty much wrote it the way it came out. I mean, I rewrote it several times. I went through a lot of revisions, but the basic narrative is that chronological narrative that you get. I mean, I think it all takes place in about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks time,
Right. In
and
October,
in the
November.
fall of 1957. And I did do some research. I mean, I went to the Library of Congress and I checked all the newspapers from that period. So any reference in there to uh,
Russians.
the flu sweeping the city, or who's playing baseball and what's on TV, that's all totally accurate,
Mhm.
which I kind of, had fun doing. But no, I would write, like I think a lot of people who, write fiction, I would write one of those small chapters, and then I would start the next one, or I would at least write some notes for what the next little chapter was going to be about. So then I could jump right into it. And then I kept doing that. I kept building on it that way.
So you didn't lose the continuity.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So you'd know where to pick up when you got back into it.
Um, okay, I think now's a good time. I'm going to play an excerpt, a recording that you did of one of the chapters. It's a chapter which includes some singing. So
Right,
let
and I
me.
should say that I like this because it's live with the band. I think you're going to hear Dominic Murray and some other people playing and singing. Jesse, my brother Jesse's on there, but it's also a slightly earlier version of that particular chapter. So,
Okay, you mean before? Yeah, I noticed that
yeah,
in going in the reading.
that
Yes,
yeah, that's
but
not
it's close enough.
yeah, it is.
Okay.
I'm going to do a very short piece here from a novel that I finished very recently. It's kind of a young adult book, I guess. And I apologize in advance because it was written in very, very short chapters, and there's about 50 of them. So no one of them really gives you much of a sense of the story. But I'll give you a little bit of a context for it. The narrator is a 12-year-old kid named Matt Coffey, who lives in the Bronx. It's 1957 in the fall. He has a crush on a neighborhood girl named Lizzie Scanlon, and he's learning the fiddle. He also has a rival on the block, a new kid who's just arrived from Ireland named Bull Burke. One thing I love about our apartment is all the music in it. My father will invite some of his friends over, and they'll sit around the kitchen table and play music for hours and hours. My dad says that one of the great strengths of our people is we know how to entertain ourselves. If you can't tell a story or play a tune, you're in sad shape, he says. You need more than the one-eyed monster, that's what he calls TV, to get you through life. They put a bottle of whiskey on the table, and that helps get the starch out of the tunes, he says. But my dad is not a big drinker. He says if I have too much of that stuff, my fingers won't do what my brain is telling them. I've never seen my father get drunk like Mr. Burke, Bull Burke's mean old man. He always seems to be blotto. And one of my dad's regular musician friends, a bus driver named Martin Flynn, is a pioneer, which means he's taken the pledge in church to never drink any alcohol. Pioneers wear little pins in their lapels, so you can usually figure out who they are. Martin says, people say all the Irish do is drink and fight. That's not true. A lot of us play music and fight. There's nothing like a great Irish tune to get your spirits going. I'm always hearing tunes in my head and tapping out rhythms on the table with my fingers. I think that's why the grown-ups are always throwing parties and going to Cayleys. They just got to get out there on the dance floor and let the music take them away. I mean, there's no comparison with rock and roll. The Irish stuff is for old people and rock and roll is for us kids, but I have to admit I like both. If the tunes make you want to jump for joy, some of the songs can be really sad, like the one that tells Kevin Barry's story. My parents and their friends seem to have an endless supply of sad songs about fighting and dying for Ireland or missing Ireland. But the one I can't even listen to at all is A Mother's Love's a Blessing. It's about how you should be good to your mother because someday she'll die and you'll miss her.
A mother's love is a blessing, no matter where you roam. Keep her while she's living, you'll miss her when she's gone. Love her as in childhood, no fever old and gray, for you'll never miss your mother's love. Yeah, she's buried.
I don't think there's a social event in the parish where they don't sing A Mother's Love's a Blessing. As for me, I can't bear to listen to it. It scares me something awful, the thought of my mother not being around anymore. When I was little, I always used to cry whenever I heard it. I don't want to think about my mother being in the hospital the way she is right now. It has to be nothing serious. She's coming home this weekend. Give me the funny songs, is what I say. Those are the ones I love. Songs like Phil the Fluter's Ball and Brian O'Lynn. One my father always sings is called Mother Malone, about a young guy who gets everyone in his girlfriend's family to like him.
Some lads when they go out courting, sure they have on the spunk of a mouse. They stand at the corner and whistle, they're afraid to go into the house. But I always walk in with my swagger, just as the old place was me own. And I sit myself down with good evening, how are you, Mother Malone?
I'd like to get some pointers from the guy in that song. I'd love to fling open the door of the Scanlon household and get all of them to love me, forcing Lizzie Scanlon to see how wonderful I am. She still has the fiddle bow I lent her, and I still don't know why she didn't show up at that nursing home for the appearance we were supposed to make. And she's going to the movies with Bull Burke, and nothing seems right with the world. I'm starting to understand why all we do is drink and fight. Thank you.
I really like that clip because it incorporates almost all the themes in the book. You know, about his mother, about Lizzie, about, you know, his connection to the older generation.
Yeah, and it worked well with the band too, because I love doing anything. For many years, we did a concert every year for like 39 years in a row with the band and a visiting Irish writer. But I would always do a little mini reading during the course of the concert, and you know, if I could involve the band at all, that was a plus. You know, that was Dominic Murray singing, by the way, not me. So
Okay. No, it's great because you can see the poem in the novel, in the text of the novel, but you know, if you're not familiar with the music, I mean that's just such a bonus to have you able to sing, you know, have the band sing like that. You know, just getting back to the language, and I'm going to pick out some other sections, other pieces that I liked in it, but in an interview you did for the Fordham magazine, you talked about a favorite professor that you credited with your attention to wordplay or word usage, Richard Giannone, if I'm saying
No, Richard Giannone. Yeah.
Yeah. And you said he encourages students to pay as much attention to phrasing as they did to plot and structure and character. And do you want to comment on that influence?
Well, I think what the point I was making in that interview was that, you know, Richard took a very unconventional approach to reading fiction. He would see, like, you know, patterns of images and you know, repeated images and symbols and words and whatnot that he felt created the sort of underlying aesthetic structure of a lot of fiction. You know, if I've done that in this book, it would take someone other than me to detect that. Because most aesthetic decisions like that are unconscious, really.
Well, yeah. Yeah, but because I think if you pay attention to one, it's just gonna flow, and someone else is gonna pick that up. But
Yeah.
if you're so locked into the language and to that rhythm, that's just gonna occur
Yeah.
naturally, and that's what makes reading so powerful, I think.
Yeah.
The other thing I liked about that piece, and just the way that your career panned out as a fan of a liberal arts education, you're a prime example of how that works, and how that ability to use language and to think critically can get you places.
Linda, 21 consecutive years of Catholic education.
Me
From
too.
kindergarten through 4 years of grad school. So.
It works. Okay, I have some favorites here. Just focusing on words and wordplay. Here's one. It's, I don't know what chapter this is called, but page 96. And he talks about using the word, emphasis on the word troubles. What did he just say? All of a sudden, I'm all ears. What is he talking about? It's the word troubles that grabs me. It seems odd, like a word from a song. Some of the older Irish, the ones who have never really come to seem like Americans, say ye instead of you, and my friends and me think that's hilarious. Troubles is right there in my mind with ye. When someone dies, you're supposed to say, sorry for your trouble. The Irish love trouble. And then you go on playing with that word. I just think it's so interesting. His sort of remarks are triggered by a discussion of the troubles in Northern Ireland, and then your play with that word, I think, is really clever.
Oh, the earlier troubles, not the Northern Ireland troubles.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because that's what the Civil War and that whole period was called.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But in his mind, I think he's thinking troubles. Oh, the trouble I have with Lizzie, the troubles I have with the Fordham gang,
yeah.
And then
Yeah, it's an interesting Irish use of the word troubles to mean really something much more troubling than trouble. War.
But again, it adds to the richness. So it's a very concise piece, but it sort of opens you up to the way this little boy is thinking, and the way he's starting to perceive the world around him, and his heritage and everything else that's going on in his life. So
because as kids, we were, it obviously in the whole stew of New York and all the diversity that implies, but at the same time, you're interacting with your parents and with other adults who are, who are mostly rural Irish people. I mean, we had one guy on our block, Tony Hardigan, who was my father's part-time retired bus driver assistant. My father was the custodian of St. Thomas Aquinas School. And I remember we were sitting on the stoop one day, and back in those days, you'd still occasionally see a horse-drawn cart come up the street, with like the rag man and the vegetable guy back in the 50s. And sometimes the horses would relieve themselves in the middle of the street. And I remember one day we watched Tony Hardigan run out and shovel up all this horse shit and bring it back to his house. He had one of the few private houses on Daly Avenue. And of course, we didn't realize that he was planting things in his backyard and using
Fertilizer.
the horse manure as fertilizer. We were thinking, this man totally insane. Why is he shoveling up all this horse shit and bringing it into his house? You know, but I mean, so you had those kinds of strange, you know, cultural disjunctions going on occasionally. But you know, so we were growing up in this world where the adults were part of a different universe. They, you know, they had come over here from a very different kind of life, and yet they were, you know, they were our progenitors, our, you know, the people we were closest to in many ways.
Well, and of course, even if your parents aren't immigrants, you think they're from another universe anyway, that you can't relate to them. So when
This intensified all of that.
well, yeah, and then when he realizes through the blind man that he's helping, that they were involved in this larger, in his mind, very cool, well, not so cool, but larger political and deadly actions or troubles when they were about the same age, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years older. You know, I think it blows his mind again. You know,
And you probably want to know if that's based on anything real.
yeah.
Well, it's fact, you know, because I mean, it is kind of, I think if people think I'm making something up, that would be one of the things they might think was made up. But in actual fact, one of my parents' good friends was a man named Charlie McCarthy, not to be confused with the dummy, who he was from County Wexford, and he did take part in the War of Independence, and I think in the Civil War afterwards, but I'm not sure. And he was indeed nearly completely blind, and my parents did recruit me to go help him and make lunch for him and walk the dog. And the dog was ferocious, and I was terrified of the dog until I became the dog's best friend. And you know, I made him soup and tea, and we talked. And Kevin Barry was one of my father's all-time favorite songs. In fact, my oldest sibling was named Kevin. I'm named after Terence McSweeney. So, you know, I came out of a very nationalist sort of political attitude. And one day I was talking to Charlie, and somehow the subject of Kevin Barry came up, and he told me he was his friend, that he knew him, which, you know, it's funny. I registered that, but it didn't hit me how amazing that was until many years later. And I wrote about it in a book of mine that came out about 20 years ago called That Special Place. I thought, holy mackerel, I actually was friends with somebody, connected with somebody who was friends with Kevin Barry. Now in the book, I make him Kevin Barry's best friend, and I create a love triangle, you know, and all of that kind of stuff. That's fictional, but the actual relationship between the boy and the old blind guy is based on my own experiences.
Yeah, and unfortunately, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience can relate to this. You hear these stories at kids, and sometimes you're like, wah, 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 and you know, they're talking again, but 10, 15, 20 years later, you connect the dots, and like, why didn't I ask the next question? Like, what was he like? Or why did you know him? You don't, it's kind of lost on you. And then the opportunity is gone. It's gone.
Yeah, I know. I wish, I mean, even with my parents, I wish I could go back in time and interview them and nail down a lot of details that are now missing. I mean, like in Ireland, I mean, my mother was one of 11, and her father, who was a Galway farmer, died when she was pretty young. I think he died probably in the early 20s or even earlier. And there are no photographs of him whatsoever. I've asked every cousin, you know, in Ireland and here, and no one, you know, he was just never photographed. So there's so much lost information like that. And, you know, I didn't do that. I did do some interviewing with one of my aunts in Ireland, and my father's best friend, PJ Conway, and Jesse, my brother Jesse's done some of that stuff too. But yeah, once that generation is gone, all that information and knowledge is pretty much gone with them.
Yeah, which is why books like this are important, I think. I think they serve a couple of purposes for capturing that moment in time. But I think there's also a universal element to them about coming of age, and these experiences happen to all of us. You're just it occurs in different contexts. Different neighborhoods, on a farm as opposed to a city, or whatever it is. But I have a couple of more. There's another word I like that you use, and it's float. I just think this is kind of lovely. It is a paradise to sit in the back of Beans, which is the neighborhood diner, I guess, or
Candy store.
Candy store.
Yeah.
And it is paradise to sit in back of Beans, sneaking smokes, drinking cokes, and listening to Why Do Fools Fall in Love. I wonder why they say people fall in love. I think it should be float. You float up on a cloud of love. I know. I just think it's very sweet. And again, I keep thinking that that's the poet in you that carefully selects just the right word.
Yeah, well, you're probably right. Yeah, I had a lot of fun writing this book, and I was very happy with the way the prose came out. I felt it had some life to it, and it kind of did what I wanted it to do. Not that it's flawless and couldn't be better. I mean, you can constantly rewrite a novel, which is something I think probably anyone who's ever written a novel knows. And that's true with poems, really. You can almost always go back over and over again and improve. And
tweak it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Does the meaning change for you sometimes? I mean, do you read something different and say, oh, I'm going to change it because I want it to, or you're just trying, you have a certain message or theme you want to get across and you're just trying to perfect that?
Well, I mean, it depends. If with prose, with fiction, you're doing something a little bit different than with poetry. I mean, with poetry, yeah, I'm always going back and rethinking everything. Mostly cutting. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just cut out the first stanza. That can often be, that can vastly improve a lot of poems. But with fiction, it's sort of different, I think. You're writing and revising in bigger chunks of language, and your intent is generally different from what it is in a poem. And the same thing with, I mean, songs are another thing altogether. That comes from a different part of your brain, I think, when you're putting words and music together. It's a different process for me, anyway.
Do you find it closer to poetry, though?
Well, yes and no. I mean, they seem. I mean, clearly, some talent and ability with language is necessary for any of these things. Poems, music, novels, etc. But and yes, when you're writing stanzas of a song or lyrics to a song, your ability and training in other areas like poetry is going to come into play, hopefully in a beneficial way. But the kind of way you're thinking about language, at least for me, is different when it's a song. And I've written far fewer songs than poems. So.
And obviously that's because you're trying to match it to the music or to have the same.
Yeah. Well, they come out differently for me all the time. I mean, sometimes a song and the melody they'll just be together from the start. You'll get a phrase and it'll have a kind of melodic feel to it, and then you'll be able to translate that into the full melody. Or I've written lyrics to pre-existing melodies. A lot of people have done that. I've done that as well. And sometimes I just wrote, my most recent song was a set of lyrics that I didn't have music for, and I sent it to Eileen Estes. I don't know if she's in attendance today, and said, do you want to write music for this? And she wrote this dynamite melody for it. So, it can happen in all different ways.
Mm-hmm. Someone just popped up and said poems are not unfinished, they're just abandoned.
Yeah. But then you go back, I find sometimes I'll go back to stuff, that's in the junk pile from 20 years ago, and I'll think, oh, this isn't bad. If I drop the first stanza,
it would be that much better.
Right.
Right. And let me just one more piece section that I really liked. Neither of us say any, this is Matt and Lizzie, and neither of us says anything for a while. I find myself thinking about the whole rush of experiences going on in my life. Lizzie kissing me and me kissing her, the Baldy invasion, JJ getting beat up, my mother being sick, Patty telling me about Kevin Barry. God, doesn't life ever slow down for a while? Lately, it feels like the waves at Rockaway, one thing after another, crashing down with a splash. I'm a little nervous about all the bad stuff, but all I have to do is picture Lizzie's face and imagine her talking to me, make everything seem all right, but only for as long as I can keep Bull's face out of the picture. I love that image of the waves and just pulling Rockaway, and not just the ocean, but Rockaway, and making that connection to where he summers. And for people that are from the area, it has a lot of resonance, I think.
Oh yeah, Rockaway was huge in my upbringing, and it's still in my memory. In fact, I have a song called "The Irish Riviera," which Celtic Thunder. There was just one live recording of it in the late '90s, but my niece Fiona, Jesse's daughter, has become a really terrific singer, and she's started doing it. So I'm hoping she'll make it a hit.
I guess how are we doing on time here? I was hoping we could play this one last clip, because I think part of, you talked about it a little bit in the beginning, is that you wrote this book with the idea that you were going to capture a lost time. And you've got this lovely video that you sent me of the Ken Burns piece.
My homage to Ken Burns, right?
Homage to Ken Burns, about a neighborhood that was gone and sacrificed to the Cross Bronx Expressway. So I'll play that, and then we can talk about that a little bit, and maybe take some questions from the.
Okay. Let me just say about that that's again the same Eileen Estes I just mentioned singing the song, and my son Michael on the fiddle, and Nita, who's not on camera, Eileen's mother, singing harmonies. And that's from an album that Jesse and Michael and I did with the help of a lot of friends back in 2017.
Okay. Now I'm saying I can share this, and now I can't find the piece. Hold on one second.
I'm looking at some of the chat questions here. Thank you, Bill. I'm glad you liked the Irish Riviera. It's one of my favorite songs of mine, for sure. I still do have the 10 items that I wrote down. My literary and music archive is now at Boston College. So
really?
Yeah, so that's as of about 5 years ago. So, but the notebooks that I wrote this book in, I haven't given to them yet, but that's going to be in the next batch. So yeah, I have all of that. I have all the research and, the original longhand of it. Thank you. I love that people like when New York was Irish. I think that's, going to be on my tombstone that I wrote that. And that's a funny thing too, because when it first came out, people instantly thought it had been around for like 100 years or something. I had like friends and neighbors from the old neighborhood tell me that they would hear people saying, "Oh yeah, that song's been around forever," and they would interrupt them and say, "No, I know the guy who wrote that." Let me see any other comments here. Thank you, Bill. That's right. We were the original Celtic Thunder. We still exist and we're still doing gigs. And we're not to be confused with the corporate entity that came along in 2008. And
Oh, sorry, I can pause this. So go ahead, finish it and I'll,
yeah, no, go ahead. I've said enough.
Cause our souls were saved, our faces changed. We were young back then and very brave. We thought our world would never change back in 1959. But they tore down half the block one day, took half of all our near and dear. So the cross Bronx has a place to run right through our neighborhood. Now the junkies wander aimlessly from the bus stop to the train. And even when the sun is out, down here it looks like rain. See the mayor, he lived way downtown. The governor way upstate. And they didn't care, they were unaware of the way they sealed our fate. Because we used to live right over there till they tore the whole block down. Left a little rubber strewn on our sacred childhood ground. Irish gods still haunt this place. You can spot them in a passing face.
Oh my God.
Where the tunes echo out the ruins of the buildings on our block. Now the barren fires haunt the street where neighbors sweet birds sing. And even when the sun is out, down here it looks like rain. Now the junkies wander aimlessly from the bus stop to the train.
I should say that a number of those photographs, like the kid in the crater looking up, that's me, and the picture at the end of the desolation, that is from Daly Avenue, from our neighborhood, and those pictures were taken by my brother Jesse back in, I think, 1957.
Really?
Yeah, and a lot of those photographs were family photographs. That my sister Eileen, that's me and her sitting on the couch together, and the baby held by the woman, that's me and my mother, and so there's a lot of family photos in there.
Yeah. It's very sweet. Is that your son on the fiddle?
That's my son on the fiddle, my son Michael. Yeah, great fiddle player.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
lovely.
We've been playing actually before the lockdown started. We played one gig as the Winch family band because with me and Jesse, and then Michael on the fiddle, and now Fiona is singing, and Jesse's son Patrick is playing the banjo. So we may do a few of those gigs, when things ease up.
Open up. I'm just looking at some questions, but while I'm looking at these, do you, just to wrap up between the book and that tape, do you miss that neighborhood life? Do you wish you had had that to share with your children, or do you pass on?
Absolutely.
You do?
Yeah, I hate the suburbs where I've been living for the last 30 years or so. No, I love cities, and I love of course, there was lots of conflict. There were lots of street fights. I didn't like that. You kind of fight, and that comes out in the book a good bit. There were things that weren't great, but it was a really supportive, tight-knit community. My father had some bad luck on a number of occasions when he was in his 50s. He was taking the priest to the bank on Monday after the collections on Sunday one time, and they were in a crash. He was in the passenger seat, and he got pretty seriously hurt. The priest was unscathed. And so he was out of work for about, I think it was like 4 or 5, 6 weeks. And, 6 or 7 of the neighborhood men, his friends, just divvied up his work and went and did it, And that kind of thing went on all the time. It was that kind of a community where you didn't have to worry about like babysitters or, whatever, because it was all built in. It was all baked in to that universe. So yeah, I do miss it. And one of the reasons why I've written the kinds of things I've written and is to sort of, capture that.
Yeah.
I want to point out too that this book the book kind of, for lots of reasons I don't want to go into, it had a convoluted history vis-a-vis the publishing of it. But I got an email out of the blue. Somebody needs to mute themselves. They're making noises.
Yeah.
I got an email at the end of December in 2019 from a friend of mine, Tom Davis, who has a little publishing house in Wisconsin. Somebody has to stop making noise.
I'm trying to see who it is.
Linda, you're the host. Linda, please mute this.
I'm looking through it all. Everybody's mute. I'm looking for the one unmuted person.
Anyway, I want to thank Tom because he contacted me out of the blue and said he was looking for the children's book that I had told him I was writing, and he couldn't find it anywhere. And if it hadn't been published, he would like to publish it. And I said, well, you might want to read it first. And he said, yeah. So I sent him the book, and he was very enthusiastic about it. And it's been great to work with. So he's here. He's at the meeting here today.
Yeah, it's good to have an ally.
Yeah. I also, Linda, I wanted to say too that there was a lot of distortion in the video of Childhood Ground. Probably because it's a Zoom thing. So I want to encourage people to, just go to YouTube.
It's
and
on
listen to
YouTube,
it
yeah.
on YouTube, and you'll hear it, without the distortion.
Okay.
It'll sound better.
I'm just, someone's asking, do you still have that list of 10 items you wrote down, which ended up being the genesis for your book? Were you talking?
Yeah, I think I answered that before. I do have the list, and it's in with the longhand version of the manuscript. I see another question here. Hugh O'Rourke, Hugh,
Mm-hmm.
who asked if the Baldies really existed. Hugh, I can't believe that you don't know that the Baldies were real. Yeah, of course they were real. In fact, Richard Price, his first novel was called The Wanderers, and the Wanderers were a made-up gang, but he has the Wanderers pitted against the Fordham Baldies, and they were real. And in fact, there was never a fight on the street the way I describe it in the book, but there was a rumor that that swept through the block when I was a kid, that the Fordham Baldies were going to invade. And I remember this because I wrote a poem about it about 50 years ago in American Friends. And so one of the things when I woke up that day with the idea for the book in my mind was to make that threatened invasion real, to have it happen in the novel. So it has a reality base to it, but the rest of it was made up. Yeah, other things. I graduated from Iona in 1967, and Jesse graduated in '64, as did Hugh O'Rourke. Bill Nevins graduated, I think, in '69, maybe.
All from Iona?
Yeah, he's here on this thing today too. Let me see. So how many of the events were based on true stories? Well, that's from Fiona, much of what's in the book is based on reality. Some things, of course, were made up, but, there were two Irish kids who moved onto the block, when I was around 13 or 14. And they were oddities to us, Irish American street rats.
Was it popular? Was the traditional music and dancing and kids taking lessons like Matt or you did as a child? Was that?
Well, there wasn't a lot of that among the kids in our neighborhood. I mean, Jesse started on the drums when he was, I think, around 10. I started on the accordion when I was 8. But really, none of my friends played music on the block.
Mm.
I think it was a little bit later. It was like a slightly later generation, like Billy McComiskey and Joni Madden and people
Mm-hmm.
who, 10 or so years, younger than I am, who grew up in a time when there was, I think, more interest in traditional stuff. Back in the 50s, the people who played, like PJ Conway and my father played a lot as the two Pats. But they would play everything. I mean, they'd play the Stack of Barley, the Mexican Hat Dance. They would mix in their notion of American music, with Irish stuff. I mean, it was all a big mosaic, of all different kinds of stuff. So there was back in those days, there was nobody was going around talking about traditional music and distinguishing between commercial music and traditional music. You could like the Flanagan brothers playing jigs and reels, and you could really appreciate great virtuosic playing. My father took me to hear Paddy Kaloran when I was a kid, and I remember him like nudging me and saying, that's Paddy Kaloran, you're hearing him, and this great legendary fiddle player. Although at the same time, you could like Carmel Quinn and Bridie, what's her name, Bridie Gallagher, and all kinds of people like that, and even older. I mean, my parents had 78s of a lot of music from like the 20s and 30s when they were young, and we grew up listening to a lot of that stuff as well.
So there was no, I don't want to use the word stigma, but if you were taking lessons or playing that kind of music, it was okay.
Well, it was okay, but it was, I mean, there was no one else I can think of. I don't know if Jesse's on this in attendance here, but I can't think of anyone else in our neighborhood
Mm,
who was any kids who were playing Irish music.
right.
We were it, really. And we belonged to the AOH Division 9 All Accordion Band in Highbridge when we were kids. And, we did that for years and years. And there were some younger people in that. But it wasn't as ubiquitous as it became later, I think, for first generation Irish American kids to be playing Irish music.
Well, that's interesting. I think we're getting close on time here. There's one other question. Are you going to write more fiction or just poetry? This is from Tom Davis.
I don't know. I think of myself primarily as a poet.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love writing prose, and I love writing fiction. So, I'm not ruling anything out. That's for sure. I can do it all.
You proved that. Okay, any other questions?
Let's see.
I would have a question.
Go ahead.
Terry, when you said before that you were writing in airports and you were writing like little pieces in longhand and stuff, and you would then make notes of the next chapter already. Does that mean that you did have the whole structure and the chapters and the story already in your head? Did you know where you were going with the whole thing while you were already doing notes for the next chapter?
This is Tina, right?
Yes.
I can't see you, but I can write your voice. Yeah, I mean, I had a reasonably good idea. I think I'm out of focus. I had a reasonably good idea of where it was all going. It was going to end with Sputnik. I knew that because that was a momentous event in my childhood, and I kind of had a fairly good idea of how I was going to get the machinery of the book to that point. But as you're writing, that's when you're really getting ideas. That's when you're thinking, oh, I'll throw this in, and all of a sudden, all kinds of things start coming to mind and start coming back to you. I mean, writing is often a revelation, I think, to the writer, because you start remembering as you start writing, and more stuff comes out. So it's kind of fascinating. It becomes a process of self-revelation. I mean, you're revealing stuff to yourself that you'd forgotten about or didn't know. So yeah, basically the trajectory was there from the start, but the details come to you as you're doing them. You're writing something and you think, oh, then I'll do this in the next chapter, and I'll add this, and I'll, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Any memory of the Gaelic League?
The Gaelic League.
Was it Gaelic League or the Gaelic Park? No.
Oh, Gaelic Park, yeah. Gaelic Park, and yeah, we in the All Accordion Band, we would often march the teams onto the field. And I've never been, much of a sports person, but I was kind of fascinated because half of these guys would be carried off on stretchers, and it was really kind of pretty brutal. And then one of my great delights in my musical past was, for reasons I don't recall, when I was 16 or so, I was recruited to be Mickey Carton's drummer at Gaelic Park. So I played there every Sunday for about 6 months as his drummer until they found an actual drummer. and I left, but that was wonderful. I played in the Catskills around that same time as a drummer, when I was in the summer of my 16th year, and I got to know Mike Flanagan of the Flanagan Brothers, who hung out in the bar that I played in. And I was playing illegally too, because you had to be 18 and I was only 16.
Mm-hmm.
But Mike was living in Albany at the time, and this was pretty close to Albany. So he would hang out in the bar there and play the banjo in the corner and stuff. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, wow, they were like a name on old 78s, from the 30s.
Right.
So,
And when you played up there, did you play for room and board, or were you up there with your family and you just?
No,
Wait.
no, listen, it was almost like an abduction. I mean, my father and PJ just said, okay, kid, you're playing in the Catskills. And they loaded me and my drums into a car and drove me up there, dropped me off and left. And I spent the rest of the summer there. I think they paid me,
Oh,
I'm
that's
pretty
crazy.
sure they paid me. I got room and board, but room and board a la, a minimum security prison. I mean, it was,
Working nights.
it was a trip. I mean, it was something I wouldn't ever want to have not done, but the doing of it was another
Right. It's always fun when it's done,
yeah,
that kind of thing.
yeah.
The question, the Gaelic League question, that was really the Gaelic League. Patricia Riley says they were active in the 50s and 60s. You're not,
No,
We did have, the Gaelic League did come to St. Thomas Aquinas, actually, although Conor na Gaeilge, but they didn't last long. I remember going to a class or two with them in the basement of St. Thomas Aquinas,
this is my brother Jesse speaking.
oh, okay.
where they were trying to teach us Cayley dances in particular, and then try to get us interested in the Irish language. But it only lasted a few sessions. Didn't go far. But I remember it pretty well.
Yeah, I don't remember it.
Okay, yeah.
Oh.
All right, I think that's about it. If anybody else have any questions?
Any old business? Any new business?
Where's John?
No questions, but to thank you for both of you. Linda, you did an outstanding job in interviewing it. Terence, I'm out of the Spanish Harlem, and you've just, and do right, and you've, Frank knows that, and you've given me all sorts of thoughts. So thank you very much for an interesting afternoon.
Oh, well, thank you.
Appreciate very much being invited.
Thank you.
Terrence, can I ask you a quick question? It's Bob Engelman. Do you have
Sure.
any memory of what Patty Coren played that night?
Oh, Jesus, no. Yeah, no, you're really,
You got so much detail. That was
I
it's
know.
fabulous.
I wish.
Really
I was
good.
at Patty's wake, best wake I was ever at. There was
Yeah.
music, wonderful music at Patty Kaloran's wake.
I bet there would be.
65.
There would
He's
have.
also from home with me in Ballymote in County Sligo.
Oh, wonderful. When
Never
did he
met
die?
anyone who heard or knows anything about Patty Coren personally, so that's great. Thanks a lot, Terrence. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it was fun. It was fun. And I see a lot of good friends, Dominic, Bernard, etc. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, this has
Noel.
been, yeah, just a tremendous turnout. Thank you, everybody. And probably mostly due to our guest here. You're a big draw, so thank you for that. And please, I would be remiss, go out and buy the book and read it. It's a good gift for your kids. There's graduations coming up, Mother's Day, Father's Day. So
Absolutely.
go to Amazon. You can get it on Amazon, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. That's probably the only place you can get it.
You can get anything on Amazon.
No bookstores. I mean, if the bookstores are open, it can be ordered from bookstores, but Amazon's probably the easiest.
The easiest way. Okay, I am going to turn hosting duties back to John. So John, if you're there. But thank you again, Terry.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank
for
you, Terry.
coming. Yeah, thanks a lot.
John,
Very good. Thank you, Linda. And also Terrence, wonderful. So many parallels between my own insignificant life and yours, very exciting ones. But
Cool.
I can see in Brooklyn that we had some of the same aspects of growing up traditionally Irish. But that must have been a great neighborhood that you grew up in the Bronx.
Yeah, it was a wonderful time. It evaporated fairly quickly once it started disappearing, but while it was there, it was wonderful.
and you think that was primarily because of the Cross Bronx Expressway or just other social factors?
I think it was well on a sort of very specific front in my neighborhood. I think there was a big influx of Puerto Ricans in the mid to late 50s. And I think that really scared a lot of the Irish into the suburbs. But in a more macro level, I mean, and I don't know if Tim Maher was here today, but you know, that 1960 with the election of JFK, that's kind of the moment where I think a lot of historians see the end of the sort of urban Irish immigrant, you know, world, and the Irish entering the middle class, and leaving the city and the working class ranks. So that, I think that's what happened on a macro level with my neighborhood. But you know, I think it was Hugh O'Rourke who told me some years ago that in 1960, the Irish and Irish American population of the Bronx was like 25%, and now it's 1%.
Yeah.
So, and probably, you know, in 1920 it was 50%. So.
Terence, if you want to go to an Irish neighborhood today, you would go to perhaps Yonkers, McLean Avenue, and that's or the Woodlawn section,
Yeah.
the last vestige. How long do you think we're going to have these neighborhoods left as distinctly Irish?
Oh, I'm surprised there are any left.
Oh.
You know, I mean, because the immigration stops, you know, to a large extent. I mean, there were a lot of illegal Irish immigrants in the 80s here, but there really hasn't been much Irish immigration in you know, in the last, you know, 40, 50 years. So when you don't have that, you don't have, you know, urban neighborhoods filled with Irish immigrants. They do come over, they're not necessarily going to live in a city. Like Dominic, your father came from Sligo to the suburbs of Detroit, right?
Is he muted?
I had to find the unmute button. Yeah, and more. I just sent you a text too. If you're from Ballymote, my father's from Gertrude, but he was on.
Hello to Gertrude.
I know my
I'm
father.
from near Cation Ballymote, couple of miles up the road to Gertrude.
That's all.
What's his last name in Gertrude?
Murray.
Oh, okay. It's well known name in
here?
Gertrude. Yeah. Well, I'm a Coleman. Now we have a Coleman place in Gertrude. It's not mine though.
No, that's
Michael Coleman.
right.
He used to be a musician one time.
It sure was.
He was.
Yeah.
So, yeah, my father was actually on his way to Australia, and he stopped in Detroit, and then there was a whole lot of Murrays that ended up in Detroit as well. So all big city stuff where the immigrants would arrive.
Yeah.
I arrived at Idlewild Airport, and Pan Am makes the going great.
My parents came on ships, of course. I mean, nobody flew back in those days.
Yeah, except me.
Yeah, well.
In 1957, I arrived in the South Bronx in 1957.
Yeah, but in the 20s, they were all on boats.
Boats, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
They didn't invent the plane yet.
Not the Pan Am planes. So.
Yeah, they're no longer in business. I still have my ticket. £95 it costs me to fly to Idlewild.
Well, they saw you coming.
I'm sorry.
Des Garvin is on this call from Dublin, by the way.
Oh, great.
Very good.
Oh, he does.
Terence, would you like to live it all over again?
Can you define it?
Would you like to go through your youthful experiences all over again and go back to that Irish neighborhood?
Knowing what I know now?
Whatever way.
I mean, sure. You know, I think many of us have a certain nostalgia for our youth and our past. I'm no exception to that. And I did love that world, although, you know, as the book kind of, I think, suggests it wasn't a place that was without its stresses and its conflicts and problems, you know.
Mhm.
You should have asked what it is. I mean, Clinton said whatever is. But
I don't think that's quite what he said. He said,
Oh, okay.
"I haven't had sex with that woman."
Oh.
Oh, any further questions? You know, we are very informal in the roundtable. Our object is to learn. So if anybody has a comment or a question for Terence, it was an excellent talk. I really am much better informed by this event. So please, anybody else want to say a comment?
Yeah, it was a wonderful.
Yeah, hi, Terry.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, who is this?
Terry, Hugh
Yeah.
O'Rourke.
Oh,
my,
you, okay.
my camera isn't working.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah,
I see
yeah.
your name.
Growing up in the Bronx, we often heard, oh, the Fordham Baldies are going to come and kill everybody. They never showed up. And I never met anybody who was a Fordham Baldy. And in the study of youth gangs, there is a whole topic called mythical gangs. And when I made captain in the police department, I would get calls from a school principal, and they'd tell me, oh, this gang from Brooklyn is coming and they're going to kill and rape and pillage everybody. They never showed up. There is a whole thing about rumors and gangs, and I never met a Fordham Baldy. I never met anybody who got beat up by a Fordham Baldy. So I always, now I'm going to have to research this. You gave me another job,
Yeah,
but
well,
I've never found
that's
a Fordham
interesting.
Baldy.
You know, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that never even occurred to me that they didn't exist, because they certainly existed in the imaginations of us all. But,
exactly.
And there were gangs, of course.
Right.
I wonder about that. I wonder if Richard Price looked into that when he wrote The Wanderers, because, you know, he was creating a bunch of gangs who, you know, were clearly up by him. But Jesse, do you know anything about that? Didn't you thought the Baldies were real, didn't you?
I did, and there was another Fordham gang whose name I can't remember that was sort of a lesser threat, but they were from Fordham. Then, of course, you know, we had in our neighborhood the Ellesmere Tims.
Right. They come into play in the book. Yeah,
but I don't know. Did you know anybody who was in the Ellesmere Tims? I didn't.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Those they hung out, you know, in that bar next to the Vogue. And
okay, but you didn't know any of them, right?
Well, I knew their names. There was that guy Killer, big guy, kind of too old to be in a gang, but still hanging out.
Yeah.
A few of them that hung out on the metal, you know, those the sort of fire escape steps on the side of the Ellesmere movie house.
Yeah.
Anyway, but find out.
By the way, Terry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm up in East Durham now. I got a little place up here, and I just came from the Shamrock House. Some things are still going on. Not many, but it's still going on a little bit.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, the Irish Alps.
If you see Ed Shevlin, say hello. Whoever was at the Shamrock House, say hello to Ed Shevlin.
Oh yeah, Larry is the owner now, guy. Yeah.
No, Ed
the Kelleher's sold it.
Ah, yeah. No, Ed visits there. He doesn't own the place. No,
okay, I'll check it out.
Okay.
I just got an email from the Fordham Baldies. They're looking for a new address.
Yeah. Don't tell them where I am.
By the way, Peter Carney is on the call. He grew up in St. Thomas Aquinas Parish also. He may have some insight onto that.
Unmute yourself, Peter.
Where is he?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that mention, Jesse. I've so far read only half of the book. I wish I'd known earlier that we were going to have this meeting. I would have read the whole thing beforehand, but I'm certainly going to work my way through it. It's just wonderful. I don't know how you maintain the voice of that young Matt Coffey so well. It's so like what I would think a kid would say, and yet it was so just so witty and bright. And there was some things in there that reminded me of my home, because I'm from St. Thomas Aquinas Parish, but I was more on the outskirts of the parish, in an area that was only very slightly Irish, really. They were mostly Jewish and some Italians and a sprinkling of Germans also, near 180th Street, off to the more to the north end of the parish, right on the outskirts, actually. But I remember at one point reading through the early part of the book and saying to myself, this is great, all the scenes I'm seeing from in my memories of childhood. I wonder, is it possible that Terry's going to write something about the car barns? And 3 or 4 pages later, there's a chapter on the car barns, which I think is where the trolleys were stored. Is that right?
Yeah, the buses. And I never knew that word was car barns.
Yeah.
Because to us, it was just the car barns.
Like one word, huh?
Yeah, it was like, it wasn't until much later I realized it was car barns.
Yeah.
R's in it.
And the thing that was almost too much was a few pages later, you're talking about this contraption that's in the kitchen that you lower by a system of pulleys, and you put clothing on it and then pull the pulleys up. I said, somebody else had one of those things too. We had them over the kitchen table, and it was so odd. And you think of it, that you have clothes drying over your head while you're sitting at the table having dinner.
I know.
I guess they came with the neighborhood.
Wait till you get to the second half of the book, Peter.
Yeah. Oh, well, I can hardly wait. That's another thing about the book, I found I've only started to read it the past 3 days or so, and I'm about halfway through. And I keep saying to myself, well, the next chapter is only 3 pages. Let's have another chapter. So it's very hard to stop,
That was the idea.
I know. I guess. Well, it's wonderful. It's just a joy. I'm so glad this event happened to kind of stir me. I've had the book for some time, but I hadn't begun to read it till just 3 days ago.
Great. I'm glad you're here.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Well, very good then. Any other comments or statements?
Say, Bill here. It's a great book, and great to see you, Terence. Great to see you, Jesse, and great to see all these good folks.
That's Bill Nevins, great poet, originally from where? From the Bronx or Yonkers?
I'm from Stamford, Connecticut.
Oh,
yeah.
Connecticut, right.
The only way I know. I'm from Stamford, Connecticut, yeah. And what I was saying is the only way that I know about New York Irish is from you, Terence, and from the Iona experience.
Well, Bill and I have been friends since like 64 or something like that. And
Yeah.
you've always been great. You've done a lot of reviews of Celtic Thunder and of my books and all that. So greatly appreciated.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
And Jeannie's here with me, and she says hi.
Hey, Jeannie. Nice to see you. All right. Let's wrap it up.
Okay, well,
thank you so much again.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Gura mahagad Terence agus gura mila mahagad tusta homai Linda. Anja fad one mit hatnaf astam.
Gorf mahagad.
Fáilte to us aram agus an clán an seo.
Yeah, ta alzar me bheansha homai. So gura mila mahagad goléir.
Yeah.
And to everybody else, our international audience all over the world, thank you very much for joining in. Linda, a wonderful job.
Yes.
And
fun.
moderator. And Terence, so very interesting. I think we could keep this going. And but maybe everybody, you especially are getting a little tired now after an hour and a half. But thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's great to be here.
Yes.
See everyone. So thanks to the roundtable. I love the Irish History Roundtable, the journal. I always look forward to it. It's got great stuff in it.
Thanks to Frank.
Frank Norton is our editor. He's
I know.
Yeah, thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Frank.
Okay.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Okay, Slán.
Long before.
Slán go fóill.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, we're in Boher, lads.
Yeah, good night. I'm Boher agus an Tá.
Goodbye, Maura.
Okay, Slán, Frank. I'll tell Pat I saw you.
Goodbye, Mary Ellen.
Bye-bye, Frank. And bye-bye, John. Frank, I'll talk soon, right?
Bye-bye,
Goodbye,
Mario.
Pat Riley.